welcome to ThinkTech Hawaii. I'm your host, Hillary Weinberg. I have with me today Arnold Dupuy. He is a contractor in the Department of Defense's Operational Energy Plans and Programs Office, and today he is going to talk about his dissertation at Virginia Tech, tentatively titled The Changing Patterns of Regionalism and Security in the Wider Black Sea Area. Arnie, welcome to the show.
Thanks, Hillary.
Arnie, so I have your bio with me here, and it says you're a 25-year veteran of the U.S. Army. How did your experience in the Army impact your choice to look at the Black Sea?
Well, actually, it had quite a profound impact. I remember I had a commander many years ago who used to say that amateurs talk strategy and professionals talk logistics. And though I knew what he meant on a very abstract level, it wasn't until I got to Afghanistan about 10 years ago that I really, that concept really struck home, and that I realized how vulnerable we were from a variety of standpoints, mostly from the ability of trying to secure fuel to come into our base for vehicles and also for generators. So in order to secure these supply lines, we had to put men at risk or women at risk to do that, and this became very much had a profound impact on me. And it's what forced me to look into energy from a much broader strategic standpoint, as opposed to purely a on the ground or a tactical level overview.
So, what is for our audience, can you describe and define the wider Black Sea region? What countries are you talking about?
Yeah, from alphabetical order, the countries I'm using for my dissertation are Armenia, Azerbaijan, Bulgaria, Georgia, Greece, Moldova, Romania, Russia, Turkey, and Ukraine.
So, you're talking about logistics just before. What are the logistics that, what are the pipelines and infrastructure that combine these countries? Well,
I'm not sure if you're able to see the map I sent over, but I found that very useful in that looking at the region and also some of the gas pipelines. You have a variety of pipelines, many of them coming in from Russia, that feed into or feed through the Black Sea states. And this has, as I see it, has the impact of creating a really kind of a unique regional development that you have to cross borders and coordinate to have these pipelines generate income and basically cross-border activities that you would not ordinarily have.
So, all right, so when we have, the infrastructure that's currently linking these countries together, what else links these countries together? I mean, obviously there's many different political systems, religions, ethnicities that are in this region. Why did you choose, why is the Black Sea region considered a region at all? What connects them?
Well, it's a region in a very brittle sense. It's not. It's very disjointed, as you mentioned. You were talking about very different ethnicities and political systems. But my view is that energy is creating a very fragile, very hard to define region, and I need to be careful that we're not talking about a region such as the European Union or NATO. This is very, a very nebulous, difficult to define, but we're starting to see a Black Sea region developing really because of these energy pipelines and this overall dependence of energy that's really come to the fore in the last 25 years, at least since the end of the Cold War.
Now, this is interesting because the last time, if you're saying energy is now reconnecting the region, the last time this region was so interconnected was probably during the Ottoman Empire. So where is the energy coming from and where is it going, and why is this so important?
Well, that's another great question, because the energy, much of it is coming from Russia, but also if you look at the map, there's a very critical underwater gas field called the Shah Deniz gas field off the coast of Azerbaijan. So they're starting to pipe this into Europe over the last several years. The idea is this will increase over time, but the purpose is to give Europe a pipeline or access to gas that's outside of the Russian and the Iranian sphere of influence. It's also important that it gives Azerbaijan its own means of exporting its gas and oil that's outside of the Russian pipeline system, so they have somewhat of a freedom of action to sell their fuels.
So you mentioned Russia and Iran. Both are huge players in the Middle East and around the world, obviously, in oil and gas. But let's talk about Russia a little bit, because it is on the Black Sea, and it has a historical influence in a lot of these countries. So what is Russia's current role in the Black Sea region? And can you speak about the dynamic between Russia and the European Union as well?
Sure. Russia is the dominant country in the Black Sea. There's no question about it. Turkey is a strong power, but it's always been overshadowed by Russia or the Soviet Union before that. But what we're having here is a dynamic development that's happening between the European Union and its need for energy to run its economy, and the role that Russia plays in this. So right now, again, we're talking specifically about gas. The European Union consumes about roughly 400 to 500 billion cubic meters per year. Russia supplies approximately a quarter to a third of that. So what's happening is this is unsustainable as far as the Europeans are concerned to have a large portion of their gas requirements supplied by one source. So they've taken action over the years to a combination of things is to increase their efficiency, so the demand is reducing that way. But there's also the European economy is still fairly weak in some areas, so the demand is not as high. And then they're also sourcing gas from other locations, primarily from Norway and from North Africa. And as the U.S. is able to export LNG, hopefully sometime in the future they'll source gas from the U.S. and North America, all the while reducing their dependence on Russia. So there's this dynamic that's playing out right before our eyes, and that Europe needs this gas. Russia has it, but there's a reluctance now in the Europeans to really rely on Russia as such a vital partner.
So how has this changed over the past few years with the sanctions in Russia and looking at Ukraine as well?
Well, the sanctions have really been in place for a little over a year now, mostly since the Crimea and then the Russians' involvement in the Donbass, eastern Ukraine, and it's had a significant impact. It's driven the ruble down quite a bit. They've forced quite a bit of pain on a lot of the Russian leaders to alter their behavior and so on. And so now we're seeing, for instance, a variety of reasons, but Gazprom, which not even 10 years ago had a market capitalization of over 250 billion, is now a fraction of that, probably under 50 billion now. So Russia is hurting badly economically, and so they're on one hand anxious to sell their product, but they're also not really hoping to sell it at such a disadvantaged cost to them.
So what has changed with the sanctions? I mean, is Russia exporting any less oil and gas to Europe? Has Europe changed their plans at all? And how you said over the past few years they have been trying to diversify, but Go on.
Yeah, exactly. The quantities have dropped somewhat, and they're going down from the quantities bought from Russia. Again, a lot of this is due to the efficiencies over the last 7 years or so. The European Union has enacted efficiencies that have been really substantial. So they're using less on a regular basis. The economy is a little bit weak in some areas. Of course, you have the German economy, which is relatively strong, but other parts of Europe are still trying to work their way out, such as Greece and Southern Europe. So all these are, to include the sanctions, are reducing the demand. And then again, there's the Russia's interest in trying to sell to China, so that to diversify their sources. So you're seeing, on one hand, a decreasing demand from Europe, increasing demand from China, and Russia trying to meet these dynamics that are changing before them.
So as Russia, is looking towards the east, and how does that affect Russia's involvement in the Black Sea region? Do you think it will go down?
I'm sorry, will it go down or?
Will Russia's involvement in the Black Sea region decrease as they look more and more towards their eastern customers?
Actually, well, it depends. At this point, they're still trying to sell their gas to Eastern Europe. Their South Stream project was canceled by Putin late last year, so now they're trying to put in Turk Stream. So they're still trying to sell gas to Europe, although they trying to circumvent the European Union's strict anti-competition laws. So they're still trying to sell it, but the combination of the demand is reducing. It may not be a feasible activity for the Russians, in which case they may be trying to sell more to China and of course India also, which is a very, very rapidly growing economy.
So how is the Black Sea region important to wider European security? Let's look back west. What is happening in Europe, and why is the Black Sea region so important? I mean, obviously, there's so much oil and gas coming from it, but there's oil and gas coming from everywhere. I mean, from the United States, from South America, from Africa, from the Middle East. Why is this region so important?
Well, the oil comes from all over the world, but still, because of the nature of gas, that much of it is still bound by pipelines. We're starting to see more LNG, which allows it to be shipped, but they're still bound. Europe is still dependent upon gas pipelines, and the Black Sea is basically a conduit. It's a region that so far it has limited gas quantities, so they're starting to find more and more in the sea itself. But really, they're looking at the Caspian. They were initially looking at the Caspian Sea as the big source of gas, and the idea with the Black Sea would house the pipelines to pump this gas across into Europe. So that's one reason why the Black Sea is so important. But another thing is it's a very vulnerable point for Europe, in that they still have some very volatile countries there. There's a lot of conflicts that have yet to be resolved, frozen conflicts, as they say. So there's a considerable amount of instability. And of course, we're seeing now the large numbers of refugees from Syria coming in, much of it through Greece and through Macedonia. So the Black Sea is very important to Europe, and to Western Europe in particular, because they see this as an area that needs to be stabilized politically, but also it's vital for their continued economic growth, particularly in the southeastern Europe area.
So, a lot of our listeners may not have heard that much about the Black Sea before. We're in the Pacific right now. So, can you talk a little bit to those conflicts that are frozen in the region?
Well, there's right now the most important, or the most in the news, is eastern Ukraine, which you have the Donbass region. You have two forces there, primarily the Ukrainians and then the Russian separatists, who are Ukrainian citizens, but they really hold their allegiance to Russia. So if you're looking at a map, figure that the Donbass region, which is the name for that far eastern section, is pretty much under Russian control. So that's, and of course, if you see the pipelines that impacts many of the pipelines going through that feed into Europe and into Southeast Europe. Another conflict we're seeing more and more is in Moldova. There's, again, a sliver of land called Transnistria on the far eastern edge of Moldova, which is basically a breakaway republic of Russian and Ukrainians that didn't want to become part of the Moldovan country back in 1992 when the Soviet Union collapsed. So that's still very much a hot spot. You have the traditional rivalry between Greece and Turkey, which isn't what is calmed down quite a bit, but there's still quite a bit of animosity, particularly over Cyprus and over Greece's desire to start drilling in the Aegean Sea, which is disputed by Turkey. Then there's the Georgia, which has been effectively carved up by Russia over the last several years, and then the Armenian-Azerbaijan conflict over the Nagorno-Karabakh region, again dating back to the early 90s, in which Armenia pretty severely defeated Azerbaijan and actually took control of about a quarter of Azerbaijan's territory, notably the Nagorno-Karabakh region. So, very briefly, those are the main conflicts. There are quite a few others at lower levels. You have Islamic insurgencies going on in southern Russia and in parts of the Kurdish issue in eastern Turkey, which all makes for again a very volatile, very vulnerable and dangerous region for all parties concerned.
So out of all of those countries, the one that sticks out in my mind as secure and stable at the moment is Turkey. So how is Turkey's role? And Turkey is the epicenter of Turkish culture and language, which extends all across Central Asia. Can you explain a little bit of Turkey's role in the region and how that's changing as, maybe there's a new Ottoman Empire coming back, maybe, it's seen as a counterbalance against Russia. What are your thoughts on this?
Well, Turkey is again, it's probably the second most powerful. Well, it is the second most powerful country in the Black Sea after Russia, militarily and politically and economically. And it's had a long-term desire to become part of the European Union, but lately, under its current President Erdogan, we've seen it really backsliding into sort of a mild authoritarian regime in which journalists are jailed and any type of protest, public demonstrations are broken up and so on, and then the long-term issue with the Kurds, which has been criticized over their handling of that issue. So Turkey is in many respects a growing economy, and it should have a strong role not just in the Black Sea but also in the Middle East. And we're seeing that more and more. That for whatever reason, Turkey is becoming under its current government, under the AKP, under Erdogan, we're seeing Turkey become slightly more Islamic in orientation, in some respects becoming turning more towards the east, turning more towards the Middle East as opposed to its traditional European focus. So we're seeing Turkey sort of backing away from Europe and looking more towards really coming out on its own as its own person, its own country, as you want to put it that way, without being dependent or reliant and focusing so much on the West.
So correct me if I'm wrong, I believe Turkey is the only country in which the United States has military forces. Is that correct?
I'm sorry, has what?
Troops stationed, military. The U.S. military has a presence in Turkey. Is that the only country in the Black Sea region?
Well, we have the air base at Incirlik, but we also have naval facilities in Greece that we're starting to develop military facilities in Romania and Bulgaria, and so NATO is actually, in response to the Russian threat, NATO is actually beginning to build more of a presence in Eastern Europe, particularly in the Baltic states, which are very vulnerable to Russia and are very fearful of being taken over. So Turkey has, Turkey has been a strong, the military class has been a strong ally of the United States. But we're seeing that change slightly with under Erdogan, which he's been able to keep the generals under wraps pretty much, and has been able to bring them under civilian control much better than his predecessors have. But that's also resulted in a much less of a ardent supporter of the United States as we had in the past.
So we're running out of time right now. Let's talk about the future. How do you see this region changing? Who is becoming involved and how the dynamics are moving within this area of the world?
Well, it's interesting because my research is showing more and more that the European Union, economically anyways, and to a lesser extent politically, is really beginning to envelop much of the Black Sea, particularly the western shore of the Black Sea. Whereas you have Romania and Bulgaria are now members, and Moldova and Ukraine want to become members. But I think, again, with Germany as the central economic power, you're seeing more and more of a shift to the east, not just Eastern Europe, but also Southeast Europe and into the Black Sea, where I think Russia, of course, will always be the predominant military power and political power, particularly on the eastern edge of the Black Sea. You're starting to see more and more of a challenge from something that has never been seen before, which is, in this case, a monolithic European economic force. And admittedly, Europe right now is economically it's shaky, but it's just not always going to be like that. There's going to be a time where they'll gradually get their economic orders, houses in order, and you're going to start to see again more of a dominance of European economic and to some extent political moving into the southeastern European region, which will pit again Russia with Europe, and also Turkey to some extent somewhere in the middle. So you see these smaller Black Sea states being in many ways squeezed between these two major powers and a smaller power, trying to figure out where they want to be. I think most of these Black Sea states want to become part of the European, the broader European Union. They didn't like being under Soviet or Russian control for many years, and they want to very badly fall within the European sphere of influence. But that's going to be difficult for countries such as in the South Caucasus, as Georgia, Armenia, Azerbaijan, which are really under Russia's, really heavily dominated by Russia.
Okay, so my team has informed me that we have a little bit more time actually today. So let's talk a bit more about these interregional organizations. I mean, you have the European Union, of course. You have a union that I know very little about that Russia is trying to form, sort of a neo-USSR. And then you have the Black Sea Economic Cooperation. Can you talk about that a little bit? What is the Black Sea Economic Cooperation?
BSEC, the Black Sea Economic Cooperation, is really it's a very loose organization. They were put forward by Turkey in the early 90s, really as in many ways as a model of the European Union, but also something that Turkey wanted to develop for itself. I think as the Turks saw Russia or the Soviet Union collapse, they want to fill this void, and so they developed the BSEC. Trouble is, it just doesn't have the economic strength to really compete, and of course, with so many competing interests, Russia and Turkey in the same organization, it's almost impossible to get any kind of a consensus or any type of a forward momentum. So BSEC has had some influence in creating community or focus groups and pushing energy, for instance, has been a big part of the BSIC. But with Russia having veto power and able to really gum up the works as they see fit, BSIC has really not been able to do much and become a glorified trade organization. So Russia is also trying to, they have their own the Eurasian Trade Union, Cooperation Union. Right now comprises Russia, I think it's Kazakhstan, Armenia, and Belarus. So it's really a very, very small. I mean, it's small economically. It's probably not much more than again a very regional, very weak trade union that doesn't have much real input other than these relatively small economies plus Russia developing their own internal trade, and so they're competing against the European Union, which has much more heft, much more impetus behind it. So there's also the SCO, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, which again I think it's more of an organization on paper. There's discussion of various cooperative arrangements and talking of military organizations or alliances, but it's really, I just don't see much at this point happening between them, mostly because you have China and Russia, which are natural competitors as opposed to natural allies. So I see this as really more of a chance or an attempt to focus particularly Russia and its allies' attention against the West as more of a showcase than anything real beyond that.
So what else connects this region? I mean, energy clearly is the obvious player, but what's going, what about agriculture, research, language, culture? Is this region really just so fractious that energy is the main thing connecting them?
In a word, yes. I don't think there's, other than energy, there's really not much there. They're trying to develop the cross-border initiatives and so on, which over time will strengthen unless something, unless there's a dramatic event within Russia. But right now, energy is the commodity that's providing this impetus within the Black Sea to coalesce to, again, when I say coalesce, I mean in a very loose terminology. We're not seeing any dramatic across-the-board effort to pool resources like you see in Europe and the European Union. It's still very fragmented, but you're seeing that this is energy and particularly the pipelines have been really the main motivating factor of this phenomenon that I see. And it's interesting because as the Black Sea is developing, slowly and haltingly as it is, we're seeing the European Union also sort of moving in concurrently. So there's many dynamics going on at the same time, and we're seeing Russia on one hand trying to increase its influence, but at the same time suffering from extreme economic problems, and also its military is despite efforts to renew its military, revitalize its military, its military is in very poor shape in a lot of respects.
So can you speak a little bit more about the militaries of the region? I mean, you just said Russia's military, is that correct, is in pretty poor shape?
It is. I mean, as I mentioned, I think they've been trying to modernize it and improve it. They've done some effort there, and they've been fairly successful. But I think the demonstration in Georgia, where they really didn't. If you analyze it closer, they didn't do that well. The reason that they were so successful is because they outnumbered the Georgians in some cases 5 or 6 to 1. So they really just bludgeoned the Georgians, who performed fairly well considering that they had really little experience, but they didn't stand a chance. I think we're seeing in eastern Ukraine, Russians are in some cases they're being fought to a standstill by the Ukrainians, who are finally beginning to show some successes and get their military themselves organized. And then again, Russia has limited capabilities. Its economy, when you look at it, it's about the same size as Italy's. So, admittedly, it's a nuclear power, so it has tremendous or demands tremendous respect in that regards. But there's really not much you can do. And I think a lot of their attempts are very ambitious, and we're starting to see a lot of results of this, where you have accidents, planes crashing. A bomber last year, I think a couple of bombers have crashed. I think from maintenance issues, we're seeing barracks collapse, killing paratroopers. So they're trying on one hand to increase their effectiveness, but it's drawing money away from other areas. So they're trying to go to more of a professional force as opposed to a conscript, and that may, over the long term, be a benefit to them to get a more professional force. But I think they realize there are limits to what they can do. So we'll see. Again, interesting to see how this develops over the next several years. As far as the other militaries, Turkey, of course, has been a NATO member since the early 1950s, and I served with Turks in Afghanistan. They're very professional, very well led. I'd say, for the most part, very competent. The other Eastern European countries are still trying to move away from the old style Soviet era military into more of a professional force based on volunteer and in that regard. But they still have some work to do, but they made great strides. Looking at interesting dynamic, looking at Azerbaijan and Armenia. Azerbaijan, of course, has become extremely wealthy because of its revenues from fossil fuels. So they're putting quite a bit of that into their military with the goal, or it's not stated directly, I don't think, but everybody knows that their desire is to take back Nagorno-Karabakh. But it's need to keep in mind that Russia keeps about the brigade-sized force in Armenia, roughly 3,000 to 5,000 personnel in Armenia now. So for the express purpose of defending Armenia. Plus, the Armenians have all the best terrain that they captured during Nagorno-Karabakh, and then Armenia is also a very competent military. So any Azerbaijani attempt to take back Nagorno-Karabakh would be disastrous for Azerbaijan, and also at least for the South Caucasus, would wipe out years of goodwill and what Azerbaijan's tried to build with its energy resources.
I love all that information. One thing that really stuck out, and the visual was really strong, was you said that Russia's economy is about the same size as Italy's economy. Is that correct?
It is, and I think people don't realize that, but of course, Russia has the land mass and has the nuclear force, but it's a really small economy, and it's in many ways very, very backward. They're in some areas they're making some success to trying to develop their own Silicon Valley, but it's just very difficult to build these things overnight from scratch, and particularly when your economy is really based on commodities. It's a very and that's another reason why the Russian economy has taken such a hit, is because I think their revenues from commodities, primarily oil and gas, is, I'd say, close to 50% of the GDP. I'm not sure the exact percentage, but it's significant. So if for instance, like we're seeing the dramatic drop in oil going from, in 2008, it was a high of 140, I believe. down to where I think we're well below 50. I think we're pushing 40 in some cases. When your whole economy is based on, or a good part of your economy is based on commodities, that's a huge hit you take. It's difficult to recover from that, and you're sort of seeing a lot of hardship going on right now, particularly in the collapse of the ruble.
Especially since Russia is the metaphorical big kid in the playground in the region. So this region is so geopolitically important, yet economically is so small. I mean, we don't think about Italy as an economic power anymore. I mean, we think of Italy as a sort of corrupt, kind of just getting along. Somehow they still have a good lifestyle country. I mean, it's not this powerhouse, but Russia really projects itself as a powerhouse. And, you're saying that their economy is not that strong, their military is not that strong, has a really long way to go. And if this is the biggest player in the region, then, this region must be so vulnerable to different forces coming in, whether it's, Europe, whether it's Central Asia, whether it's, if it's, Russia, Middle East. I mean, no wonder that, even to the south, you have ISIS or ISIL, and, that's making some headway. So, it sounds like a very, very volatile region holding a lot of the world's oil and gas, which of course are the most important commodities out there. So, to wrap up the show a little bit, I have a, question about, this is such interesting information that we don't necessarily talk about every day. So what are resources you'd recommend for listeners who are interested in hearing further or looking up further into this topic?
I'm sorry, I think, what resources are we looking at?
Yeah, what books and think tanks and different resources have you used that have influenced your research? Because, it's sort of, at least out in Hawaii, not such a closely looked at topic, but clearly has a lot of importance.
Well, there's a variety of think tanks. One I like to refer to quite often is the Atlantic Council here in Washington, D.C. Again, excuse me, I realize that most of your audience is looking at things from a Pacific standpoint, but from Washington, D.C., you have so many great think tanks. But there's the Atlantic Council, there's the CSIS, the Center for Strategic and International Studies, some of the major think tanks that address geopolitics, plus they have their own energy studies units. And then there are the ones overseas too. There's an excellent resource is Chatham House, also called in London, called the Royal Institute of International Studies, RIIS. Every year they have every January or February they have a major conference on energy, primarily Middle East, North African energy, and I've been to a few of those, and those are excellent resources for the quality of the speakers, and so you see what's out there. If you can't attend, then you sometimes they have they post them online. You can read the transcripts and develop your own network that way. But then there are also think tanks that operate out of Germany. I've used, and also in Russia itself. There's the Carnegie Institute in Moscow, which has some excellent analysts working there. So there's a variety of sources that I've used over the years. Not also including the print sources such as The Economist and the Financial Times and the Wall Street Journal, where I try and get a lot of my information from that also.
Yeah. In research I've done on this topic, I found Daniel Yergin's The Prize and the Quest to be really great sources as well. But I think we're about done today. So, Arnie, thank you so much for joining us and for your patience and for taking all the time to discuss this really interesting topic today. I'm your host.
It's my pleasure. I appreciate it. Thanks for inviting me, and hopefully we can do it again.
Great, absolutely. I'm your host, Hillary Weinberg. This was The Whole Gamut on ThinkTech Hawaii. Thanks for joining us.